Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokemon trading card game.
You're listening to PTCG Radio.
Now this week, I don't know if the quality is going to sound a little bit different, whether it's going to be a bit quieter, etc. The reason is, basically, I've moved house, and I'm using borrowed equipment from my new job, so if it's not exactly perfect, you will have to forgive me. Needless to say, I'll work to make sure it gets better and better every week. Now what we're going to be doing this week is mostly going through a lot of new news. I mentioned that I moved house and I was without internet for a couple of days, and for some reason during those 2 days there was an absolute flurry of really quite spectacular news, and I'm hopefully going to go through all of that in as much detail as you like this week. So starting off, we've been told that in the first week of October we are getting Dragon Vault blister packs. Now this isn't a new set per se in the same way that we would usually have a new set. This is a mini set, the kind of thing that Japan is very used to, but we're not. And these Dragon Vault sets are going to give us the 20 cards from Dragon Selection. Now this is a mini set that Japan had, that I've mentioned a couple times in the podcast, and it was a completely holographic set of 20 Dragon cards, which were introduced to push the new Dragon set when it came out. Now what we're actually going to have in this set is all the cards from Dragon Selection. Now it's a 20 card set, and there is a slight query at the moment concerning what those 20 cards are actually going to be. Now most of them are nice and easy, we're getting all the Pokemon, and we can assume we're getting fast ticket. The last 2 slots, people are saying that we're going to be getting the holographic reprints of Experience Share and Super Rod. Other people are musing that there is a promo Haxorus and a promo Dragon Kyurem that we haven't got yet, and people are saying that they might be the last 2 cards in the set. Needless to say, as soon as the lineup for this set is confirmed, I will let you know. So what you actually get for $10.99, or in the UK you're looking at £8 to £10, you're getting 3 packs, but each of these packs only actually contains 5 cards rather than the 10 we're usually accustomed to. And needless to say, there is a code in these packs as well. Along with those 3 packs, you'll also be getting a promo card. Now, Druddigon has been confirmed as a promo card. I'm not entirely sure about the others yet, because they haven't been announced. But the Druddigon appears to be a slightly jazzed up version of the one from the set, so it's highly possible that the other 4 promos could indeed be exactly the same as that. Other cards from the set jazzed up a bit. However, maybe these promos that come with the pack will be how we get the Haxorus or Kyurem I've mentioned, or maybe we won't get those cards at all and they'll be coming along later. The other thing to notice is that just like in Japan, this entire 20 card set will be completely holographic. So although you're only getting 5 cards instead of the usual 10 per pack, you are getting 5 holographic cards, and I think we can all agree that that's pretty darn good and should make a nice bit of difference.
But Ross, what does this all mean?
Well, one thing that it means is that the price of Rayquaza, the secret rare from Dragons Exalted, is going to be going down, down, down. It's still a particularly good card. It is an excellent tech against Garchomp Palteria, and its second attack, which for a Lightning, a Fire and a Colourless does 90 and goes through any effects such as Eviolite, is still pretty darn good for taking things down like a Rayquaza EX, regardless of whether they have an Eviolite. However, it's going to get a lot cheaper, because it's no longer a brilliant card that can only be gotten as a secret rare. The secret rare becomes a nicer version of a card that we can get more cheaply. So yes, very much a good card, but it is going to go down in price, and I think we can all agree that that's a good thing, because nobody likes having really expensive cards in the format that are also really, really good. The other thing it means is that we're getting Fast Ticket, which is a trainer that guarantees that you go first as long as you have it in your opening hand at the beginning of the game. And needless to say that if both players have it in their hand at the beginning of the game, you once again flip a coin to decide who goes first.
What's the catch?
The catch is that that's all this card actually does. If you don't have it in your opening hand, it literally does nothing. It cannot be used during the game, it has no effect. I suppose you could count it as something to discard with Ultra Ball, but if you're playing a card just to be discarded with Ultra Ball, there may well be something wrong with your deck. Now if you do play 4 of them, it gives you just under a 50% chance of starting with a fast ticket. For you to put it in some kind of context, imagine, and I'm sure you've all been there, where you play 4 of a particular Pokemon in your deck. At the moment, you may be playing 4 Gabite in a Garchomp Altaria deck, or you may be playing 4 Sableye in a Darkrai Hammers, or something along those lines. You'll start with Fast Ticket approximately the same number of times as you start with that particular Pokemon that you play 4 of. Now the other thing is, a lot of people aren't going to see much benefit at all if you don't actually play 4 of this card. If you just play 1, 2 or 3, it decreases your chance more and more of actually starting with it, and as it is a card that only gives you any benefit when you do start with it, running less than 4 can seem to be pointless at times. Having said that, the Japanese Battle Carnivals, which allow the Japanese players to qualify for Worlds, some people did play 1 and do very well in these. So maybe it is a card that you can chuck 1 of to give you maybe 1 extra turn of going first per tournament, or something like that. The thing is that lists are very, very tight since Junkarm's left. We're having to play more trainers than we used to make up for the fact that we can't use Junkarm as a utility trainer. And as we're all trying to find extra space in our decks to make them consistent, I don't think Fast Ticket's going to be that great. I think there are certainly going to be decks that come out which take advantage of it, but I think at the moment there's too many people making inconsistent decks to really be worrying too much about Fast Ticket. What it may do is allow Donk decks to make a comeback. The most obvious Pokemon to take advantage of this is Tornadus EX, which, if you've got a Stadium in play and a double colourless attached to him, does 60 damage. A lot to knock out pretty much any evolving basic, and enough to, with a plus power, knock out things like Sableye and Emolga. Now that does mean that you have to start with a Tornadus EX, it does mean you have to have a Sky Arrow and a DCE turn 1, as well as starting with a Fast Ticket, but there are certainly decks out there that could take advantage of this. Problem is, with these Donk decks, is that you're likely to need to play it as fast as possible, which means you're going to have to play a heavy Junkarm line, and as I mentioned in the podcast last week, Juniper is not particularly good at the moment, because you're having to discard so many things, and you run the risk of making a Donk deck where you're making a 56 card deck, because you're trying to fit in Fast Ticket, and then you're having to waste resources by Junipering them away early game. So Fast Ticket, it's got potential, and somebody is going to make a deck that breaks this card and is amazing. But the whole point of my little talk about Fast Ticket there was really just to tell you that don't be sucked in by the allure. There are good things you can do with it, but make sure you're playing it properly. Don't cut down to an inferior list and whack 4 Fast Tickets in there. Because if you've got a bad list, it doesn't really matter if you go first. The second piece of news, and this is particularly good, is that the new championship point structure has been coming in, and it looks like a doozy. The first thing to mention is that instead of 1s, 2 points, 1 point, etc., we're having them in 10s, so you're getting 30, 40, 50 points at a time.
You're kidding me, right?
I'm not kidding you, but I particularly think this is a good thing. So just to run you through, in Battle Roads now, you'll get 15 points for first, 12 for second, and 10 for third and fourth. In Cities, you'll get 50 points for first, 40 for second, and 30 for third and fourth. In States, you'll be getting 100 for first, 90 for second, and 70 for third and fourth. In Regionals, you'll be getting 120 for first, 110 for second, and 90 for third and fourth. Interestingly, in Nationals now, you'll be getting 500 points if you top 8 US Nationals or top 4 UK Nationals, giving you an automatic invite, as the cut-off point is going to be 400 points. Now, that is a very important point to note, and something I mentioned last week. The cut-off is going to be 400 points. What that means is that once you have acquired 400 points, you have got your invitation to play at Worlds next year. You don't have to do anything else. It's there. Nobody can knock you off. No one can get rid of it. Your points only go up. They don't come down. Now, everybody liked this. Now, I said last week that they need to pick a good number. The number I suggested was 40. And they've basically gone up in increments of 10, which means they've effectively set the limit at 40. Now, I think this is going to let a few more American players in. I think Europeans, it might let a couple more in. Not a huge amount more, but I think we are going to see an increase in the amount of Americans playing in Worlds. However, I think they may have picked a number just high enough to stop a silly influx of new people. Now, given that we know how many points you need to qualify, and given that we know how many points you're going to get for each particular tournament, what I've done is I've devised my guide to qualifying without winning a single tournament. In fact, I've gone through and I've run the numbers, and I can tell you now how to qualify without ever getting more than a top 4 in any tournament throughout the year. Before I tell you this, I do want to stress that if you don't get more than top 4 at any tournament throughout the year, you do have to worry how well you're going to do at Worlds. But here we go. Battle Roads. If you get 5 top 4s at Battle Roads, that gives you 50 points. If you get 4 top 4s at Cities, that will give you 120 points, giving you 170. If you top 8 3 state championships, now in England, states and regionals are mixed. They've always been mixed in the past. As we've heard, states and regionals have different points now. So I don't actually know what they're going to be in the UK, although I would imagine that some will be designated states and some as regionals. But assuming that you top 8 2 states and 1 regionals, you get 170 points, bringing you to a total of 340 points. And then if you go and get top 16 at nationals, you'll get 60 more points, and that will take you to exactly 400 points. 5 top 4s in Battle Roads, 4 top 4s in Cities, 3 top 8 in states and regionals, and the top 16 at nationals, and boom, 400 points. Now, of course, you don't want to go into nationals knowing that you need to top cut to get your invitation, and obviously, if you do better than top 4 or top 8 in those tournaments, then your points are going to go up, and you're going to find yourself getting towards that target of 400 much quicker. The other thing to note is that the best finish limits have changed. Instead of 8 Battle Roads, your best 6 now count, and in turn, instead of 5 cities, your best 4 cities now count. States is still 4 and nationals is still 1. So looking at the guide I just gave you, there is room there for another Battle Road and another states or regionals to add into that. But there are a few other things to point out. Battle Roads are now less important than they were. There are less points to gain. You're effectively getting 1.5 under the old system, and you can now only use 6 instead of 8. But Battle Roads are a lot better to go to and a lot fairer now, because you're getting points for top 4. You're effectively getting 1 point for 2nd, 3rd and 4th, which means there's more points on offer. I'm also hoping that these will now, as I said last week, mean that by the time Spring Battle Roads comes around, the really good players aren't going to as many because they don't need to, and that'll open them up and make them a bit more inclusive and a bit less competitive for the newer players. Although the best finish limit for cities has been cut from 5 to 4, if you win 4 cities, you'll actually still get 200 points. That means you're halfway with just cities. So if you're one of those people that's good at cities and likes to grind for your invite at cities, you can still very much do that. There are 2 other things I want to point out. Firstly, the fact that you get points at nationals now rather than automatic invites, you might think that doesn't make a difference, but it does. It makes a very big difference. And one difference it makes is that there are no pass downs now. Freddie Khan represented the UK at World this year, finished a respectable 4-3 and came 34th, agonisingly close to a top 32 finish. His invite actually came from a pass down. He ended up top 8 with very good resistance and ended up with the invite pass down when a top 4 finisher, Matt Blower, was unable to attend Worlds. However, if the same thing were to happen this year, Matt Blower wouldn't have an invite for Worlds. He would have enough points to cash in for an invite, and points cannot be transferred to another person, so someone in Freddie's position would not be able to get an invite this year, which is quite a big difference. However, as I've mentioned, with the new point system, we can expect more people to get in with championship points, so maybe cutting out a few people getting in with pass downs is going to end up being a good thing. The last thing is just a curiosity that I've noticed. If we go back to Battle Roads, you get 15 points for a win, 12 for a second, 10 for a third, and 10 for a fourth, which is somewhat strange because those 12 points you get for a second might as well be 10. And let me explain myself. Everything is done in tens. Cities, states, regionals, nationals, etc. It is all done in tens. The only tournament where you can get anything less than a multiple of 10 is at Battle Roads, where you get 5 for an extra 5 if you win, and an extra 2 if you come second. However, that's completely pointless. That extra 2 will count in only 2 situations. If you come second 5 times, you'll get an extra 10 points. And if you come first once and second 3 times, you will effectively get an extra 5 points. But they are the only situations in which that is actually going to make a difference. So, thank you Pokemon, but those extra 2, we're not fooled. It's still a good thing though, because effectively you get 10 points for second, third or fourth. And the last piece of news, and I'm aware that the news section of this podcast is going on longer than usual, but as I said, lots of news this week. The last piece of news is that our November set has been announced, and it will be called Boundaries Crossed. And the reason it's called that, well, one of the reasons anyway, I imagine, is because Kyurem is known as the Boundary Pokemon. And this is a set which is introducing black and white Kyurem. Now this is basically going to be the English prince of the Blue Flare, Freeze Bolt and Cold Flare set that was released in Japan and that I covered in my podcast a few weeks ago. So if you want to be reminded of the good stuff in that, like the Ace-Spec trainers, Skylar, Hugh and Landorus, or as I call him, the Eels Killer, just go back and listen to my podcast from there, where I look at all of these things in way too much detail. Now the main thing I wanted to talk about this week, other than the news of course, is that our new Pokemon season is go. Now we've had our first Battle Roads of the season here in the UK, and this was in Manchester and took place on Saturday. It was quite well attended, and it was a 5-round tournament, again with no top cut, because we don't have top cuts anymore. Johnny Hall was victorious in that tournament, and his Rayquaza Eels deck beat out Carl Blake's Terrakion deck in the final round. What was quite funky about Johnny's win, he actually went to sudden death against Carl Blake. He started with a Rayquaza, attached an energy, played an end, put them both down to 1 card, and used Rayquaza's Celestial Roar, pretty much guaranteeing that he was going to hit enough energy to get a KO and the win before Carl did. Congratulations also to Russell Moore, who came third with his Garchomp Hydreigon deck, and Charles Barton, who came fourth with his Eels deck. And commiserations to Andy Stone, who went 4-1 but missed out on any points because of the way things are. Now the following day there was what we call a pro tournament at a card shop in Nottingham. Now this is kind of like a Battle Roads, but it's not sanctioned and there are no points available. However, it tends to be used by good players as a testing ground, so lots of good players and lots of good decks, and this was also won by Johnny Hall's Rayquaza Eels, with George Boone taking second with Rayquaza Eels, and Vlad getting third with Rayquaza Eels. And I forget who came fourth, but you may not be surprised to hear they played Rayquaza Eels. However, this is not necessarily saying that Rayquaza Eels is amazing and the only deck. It means that Johnny did very well with it on Saturday and people wanted to play it on the Sunday. It could well turn out that Rayquaza Eels is the best deck in the format, but it's going to take a little more time before we can say that with any certainty. So moving on then, we can look at Rayquaza Eels. Now this is a deck which you may not be surprised to hear, revolves around Rayquaza EX and normal Rayquaza, and the Eels, which have been tearing up the format for some time now. Now Rayquaza EX has 2 attacks. Celestial Roar for a colourless energy allows you to discard the top 3 cards of your deck, but if any of them are energy, instead of discarding them, you attach them to Rayquaza. It's then got a second attack, which I want to call Dragon Rage, which allows you to discard either all the fire or all the electric, and you do 60 damage times the amount of energy you discard in that way. Which means if you discard 3 energy, you do 180, enough to one-hit KO any EX. That's huge. It's like Magnezone's attack, but on a basic, and you discard rather than Lost Zone. It is fantastic. Now, Emble can help to fire him up with a fire energy, but it's a stage 2 and you've got to have the energy in your hand and there are consistency issues. What is far better here, as I've said, is Eels. It's a stage 1 and it attaches from the discard, which is quite fantastic. If you get a Sky Arrow bridge down, then Rayquaza EX's 1 retreat cost comes into play here, because you can use Dragon Rage and then retreat and then use it with the other and keep going. You attack with 1, retreat, Dynamotor with your Eels onto it while you attack with the other one, and just keep that going in a loop. Now, Johnny's list that he won the Battle Rose with also played 2 non-EX Rayquaza. Yes, he was lucky enough to own 2 secret rare Rayquazas. This is another card which is hard to use unless you put it in the right deck. In an Eels deck, you can get 2 electric energy with Eels, attach a fire energy, and you're one-hitting things like Rayquaza EX. It hits for 90 damage, but it goes through things like Eviolite. It 2-hits pretty much any EX, like Darkrai, etc. So it's a very, very good utility Pokemon. Something to mention about Johnny's list, though, was that he actually played a wide range of attackers. He played Mewtwo EX, he played Zekrom EX, which can do 150 damage and one-hit things like Hydrangea. He played Tornadus EX, and he played 2 Raikou EX. Raikou EX, of course, being the legendary dog where you discard all the lightning energy attached to it and do 100 damage to the bench. You then retreat it for free with Sky Arrow to put forward a second Raikou, which you've just charged up with Eels, and you loot them in the same way that you can loot these Rayquazas. Now, Johnny has admitted himself that his list was somewhat inconsistent, but it can't have been that inconsistent because he went 5-0 in Manchester and took home the win. What I think this really shows us is that Eels is a very good deck, and it really is a kind of deck that you can put a lot of different attackers in and really bend to your playstyle. Johnny chose to go a bit of a toolbox route, use a lot of big attackers, and just pull out the right ones for the particular matchup he was facing. Now, I'm afraid I wasn't at the Battle Rose last week, so I will bring you an interview with Johnny, he has agreed to do one, as soon as I possibly can. As I should be seeing him on Saturday, you can hopefully expect an interview with Johnny about his success in next week's podcast. Now, I mentioned a lot of people are playing Rayquaza Eels, and that means that there's going to be a little bit of mirror match action going on. Now, I've spoken to players who play this deck, including Johnny, and what they basically said is that if you play too many different attackers, it can come down to who starts better. But a lot of the time, it's going to come down to who plays the most non-EX Rayquaza, because that allows you to get KOs on EX Rayquaza while only giving up 1 prize. And that's really bad because Secret Rare Rayquaza is about $100. As I mentioned in the news, though, it's going to go down. You'll be able to pick one up for $5 to $10 when this set hits in the first week of October. Terrakion has been seeing a lot of increased play. It certainly saw a bit of play in the Pro Tournament the day after the Battle Road. And this is pretty good because it one-hits pretty much any electric Pokemon unless they have an Eviolite. And it works well in the mirror. The problem is, you're then playing Fighting Energy as well as playing the Fire Energy for Rayquaza and the basic electric energy that you need. It forces you to play Prism Energy, and then you're at the mercy of decks playing Enhanced Hammer or Garchomp, etc. It's going to take away from your consistency. However, if you can get it working, and you can play all those different attackers, you're going to have one hell of a deck. Now, the last thing I really want to talk about today is Carl Blake's deck, which was somewhat unusual and was a bit of a surprise.
Please, do tell us more.
I'd be glad to. Carl's deck, so I'm told, now I haven't actually spoken to Carl personally about this, I'm going off the word of people who played his deck, but I'm told he played 3 Terrakion EX, 3 Terrakion and 2 Stunfisk, stressing of course that that is not yet confirmed. So you've got the regular Terrakion there to hit Revenge, 90 damage for 2 energy after your opponent takes a KO. You've got Terrakion EX to bust out a consistent 90 damage while placing energy from your hand. And as a side note here, there was a bit of confusion over Terrakion EX's attack. It does 90 damage and says attach 2 energy from your hand to any of your bench Pokemon. It does not say you must or you may, it just said attach 2 energy. And there was a big debate going on around the forums as to whether this meant that you'd have to call a judge to make sure your opponent was placing down energy, and that if they didn't place down 2 energy, to make sure they didn't have it in your hand. The ruling has been made on PokerGym that the hand has been designated private. What that means is that your opponent effectively can choose to lay down the energy or not as they see fit, and you can't say anything about it. So, you've got Terrakion Regular to do the revenge KOing, you've got Terrakion EX to do a consistent 90 damage while peppering energy on your field, and Stunfisk, I like to call him the Dynamo Killer. He does, for a single fighting energy, 20 damage and 20 to the bench. So if you hit a Dynamo, that dies because of the weakness. You then hit a second Dynamo on the bench, which has 20 damage. They evolve it to an eel, and the following turn you attach a second energy and do Stunfisk's second attack for 40, which doubles up to 80, and with the damage from the previous turn will KO that eel. So it's quite frankly pretty good for taking down Dynamos and for taking down eels. Now, he played this deck with Super Scoop Up to heal his Pokemon, Experience Share to keep energy on the field, Eviolite to reduce damage, Tool Scrapper for a little bit of disruption, taking away Eviolites and things like that, which I imagine was especially there to make sure he always one-hit KO Darkrai, and obviously with all of his Pokemon having a retreat cost of 3 or more, he could search them all out with Heavy Ball, and he took advantage of that. Now this is a good anti-meta deck. There's still a bit of Darkrai running around. There is a lot of eels running around. It's a very, very good deck. However, it is not perfect yet, and I don't think it's a deck that will strive in every metagame. I think it's a very good deck, but I think it's just a good deck for the minute more than anything else. I would also mention that in the final of the Battle Rose, it did lose to eels, although that was in sudden death. So you do have to wonder if you play against a good enough eels player who plays enough non-electric attackers, if this deck can be taken down. So looking at the tournament so far and looking at the way the metagame's shaping up, it's all about eels. Darkrai Hydreigon is looking like a good bet. It is very good against eels Rayquaza, and it got third at the Battle Roads in Manchester. And it is still early. Yes, eels is good, but similarly, we're early on. Eels has weaknesses. It's being played. I wouldn't be too sure it's going to stay as the main and the best deck forever. The other thing to mention is, thank goodness Rayquaza EX is coming out in a tin this month, or else the price of that would just about be going through the roof at this point.
So, what is your prediction on this?
My prediction is that when we get the regular Rayquaza coming in Dragon Vault, it's going to keep Rayquaza EX in check a little bit. I think that people are also going to start making Eels hate decks similar to Carl Blake's deck he had success with at the weekend. And I think that Eels is going to be good, but like I said, I think it's going to be kept in check. Remember that it's early and the format's going to change, it always does. I don't see Eels getting bad per se before Worlds, but similarly I don't foresee it being the best deck from now until Worlds. I think it'll be consistently good and people will win with it, but I think that it is a deck that can be taken down. Now, I need to give you the usual reminders here, of course, that if you do want to email me, please do at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, and remember, of course, that you can find me on Twitter at TheWassy. If you want to get in touch, you can email me or you can tweet me. If you're listening to this on Pokemon Dan's YouTube channel, just leave a little comment and I will get it right there. Thank you to Six Prizes, Pokemon Dan and Dot Deck for helping me to promote this podcast. And I will be back next Wednesday, as always, with another podcast all about the Pokemon trading card game, the new season, and basically anything you need to know. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.
Well, thank you for that, Ross. It was both informative and stimulating.